Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Indigenous Co-Innovations of Food, Energy, and Water Systems. We are training students to co-design with Indigenous communities using systems thinking. We are funded from a national a research traineeship grant from the National Science Foundation. So this is the third of 3 workshops that we have had on this subject, with a different topic every time. This one is on FEWS research and career opportunities. The first session will be on Indigenous pathways to graduate research opportunities in FEWS, and FEWS is Food, Energy, Water Systems. I will be doing the introductions this morning, and then Karletta Chief Mitchin will be doing it this afternoon. The panel discussion will be moderated by Dr. Elizabeth Hoover from the University of California, Berkeley. But first, I'd like to introduce what this whole workshop is all about, the co-infused background and the NRT research traineeship partners. My name is Alice Agagino. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering at University of California at Berkeley, and I also hold the position of education director at the Blum Center for Developing Regions. These are the other co-PIs on this workshop project. Maya Trotz and Rebecca Zarger are from University of South Florida. Karletta Chief, who you'll meet shortly, is from University of Arizona, and Don Robinson is from Diné College. Our original workshop was scheduled to be held, in fact, at Diné College in early June, but because of coronavirus, we had to make it virtual. We had around 400 people actually sign up and register for the workshop. These were our goals: to develop a network of researchers co-working on FEWS challenges in tribal nations, working with community members, environmental professionals, and innovations in food, energy, water systems, researchers, educators, and students. We had various listening sessions and speakers to identify challenges and opportunity, and to identify best practices working with and within Indigenous communities. Another goal was to identify funding opportunities from which we could develop solutions and submit proposals. On the first day of the workshop, we had, it was because of the coronavirus lockdown, we decided to have a special session on coronavirus and how to be resilient to pandemics like it. We had a session, or several sessions, on Indigenous food, energy, water systems. We looked at past practices and innovations. We looked at Diné traditional FEWS frameworks and systems on the Navajo Nation. We had a session on decolonizing FEWS innovations, looking at STEAM as a framework: science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And then we looked at food innovations and learning with K through 12 Indigenous students, and had an opportunity for networking with the students. I think one of the highlights of the first session was this presentation by Dr. Begay from the Navajo Nation. And I think it was a good framing of understanding the Indigenous thinking perceptions and the interconnectedness between meaning and everything that works as a whole and undivided. And it was a way to look at science as systemic, organic, and ecological. We also had breakout sessions where we worked on how sustainability could be considered in the design of FEWS with Indigenous communities. And more importantly, we were charged with finding out how we could put these solutions to action. And some of the topics we covered included sustainable food, energy, and water systems, more generally health and well-being, resiliency to COVID-19 and other pandemics or potential disasters, environmental justice. We looked at multi-generational perspectives of FEWS across generations. Again, we looked at K through 12 education, but also broadening participation in science, technology, art, and mathematics through FEWS. We looked at language and cultural brokers, and then we had a session on digital transformations in access and development, which seemed particularly important because access continues to be an issue today and certainly was an issue at that first session. We also had 2 student listening sessions. We had guiding principles that emerged as an overall framework: the importance of community campus relationship building. It's more than just the campus. It was the campus, the students, their families, and their communities. Accountability came up as a factor, program flexibility, and inclusivity. And what you see here on the pathway is the framework and the metaphor that we're using for the whole workshop, and that is the pathway for success that includes financial supports, mentoring, undergraduate to graduate navigation, which is something that we're going to address graduate education today, research engagement, resources for the families, networks of students and other communities, expanding library access and general lab resources, and institutional support for Indigenous learners and various technology support systems. So the goals of this workshop today, the third workshop, is to understand pathways for Indigenous students pursuing research in careers in food, energy, and water systems, and to identify organizations and institutions that provide FEWS research in career pathways and opportunities. We have decided to work on an NSF includes Alliance participant so that we can have a take the speakers and the communities we've been working with to have a greater network so that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. The outcomes from the workshops are this includes Alliance proposal to identify, connect, and strengthen pathways for education, research, and careers in FEWS for Native Americans. And we will have continued events and conversations, but they'll take maybe a different format and theme in the future. We'll have virtual tours of tribal colleges. We'll have tours of FEWS projects. We plan to develop a database of best practices, curricula, and resources. And we are working on various publications that have come out from the various workshops we've had, including this one today. So with that brief summary of an introduction of what brought us here, I'm pleased to introduce our first moderator for the first session. Dr. Elizabeth Hoover is an associate professor in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy, and Management at UC Berkeley's College of Natural Resources. She has a rich multidisciplinary background with a PhD from Brown University in anthropology and a focus on environmental and critical medical anthropology. Her current research focuses on Native American environmental health and food sovereignty movements. She has published articles about food sovereignty, environmental reproductive justice in Native American communities, the cultural impact of fish advisories on Native communities, tribal citizen science, and health and social movements. She has written several books in these areas. The River is in Us, Fighting Toxins in a Mohawk Community, and another, Garden Warriors to Good Seeds, Indigenizing the Local Food Movement. She's also co-authored a book on Indigenous food sovereignty in the United States, Restoring Cultural Knowledge and Protecting Environments and Regaining Health. And I have a copy of it right here. I highly recommend this book. So with that, please welcome our first moderator, Elizabeth Hoover.
Thank you everyone for joining us here today. So I'm going to briefly just introduce all of our amazing panelists and then dive into a few questions about the programs that they're running at their individual institutions. So Dr. Gregory Cajete is a Native American educator whose work is dedicated to honoring the foundations of Indigenous knowledge and education. Dr. Cajete is a Tewa Indian from Santa Clara Pueblo who is a practicing ceramic, pastel, and metal artist. He is extensively involved with art and its application to education. He is also a scholar of herbalism and holistic health. Dr. Cajete also designs culturally responsive curricula geared to the special needs and learning styles of Native American students. He worked at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico for 21 years. While at the institution, he served as Dean of the Center for Research and Cultural Exchange, Chair of Native American Studies, and Professor of Ethnoscience. He is the former Director of Native American Studies for 18 years and is Professor Emeritus in the Division of Language, Literacy, and Sociocultural Studies in the College of Education at the University of New Mexico. In addition, he has lectured at colleges and universities in the US, Canada, Mexico, New Zealand, Italy, Japan, Russia, Taiwan, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, England, France, and Germany. And we are all looking forward to the day when we can travel like that again and be able to visit all those places. Next on our list, we have Jani Ingram, who is has a PhD in chemistry and biochemistry and investigates environmental contaminants with respect to their impact on health. A major part of her research is focusing on characterizing uranium and arsenic contamination in water, soil, plants, and livestock. A critical aspect of her research is to foster collaborations with the Native American community and leaders to build trust, obtain access to field samples, and gain insight into their health concerns. recruiting Native American students to work with her as Navajo principal investigator on the project, and building an interdisciplinary collaborative team of scientists with expertise in analytical chemistry, geoscience, cancer biology, and social sciences are also important to her research. She is also a member of the Navajo Nation and is involved in the outreach activities for Native American students in undergrad and graduate research. She's the principal investigator of the Partnerships for Native American Cancer Prevention and the director of the Bridges to Baccalaureate program. She was named the 2018 recipient of the American Chemistry Society Award for encouraging disadvantaged students into careers in the chemical sciences. Next, we have Timberley Roane, who is Lumbee, who received her PhD from the University of Arizona in 1999. Dr. Roane is currently an associate professor of microbiology in the Department of Integrative Biology at the University of Colorado, Denver. Her research interest aims to increase our understanding of the roles microorganisms and microbial communities play in ecosystem restoration, chemical mitigation, and energy production. In collaboration with scientific, regulatory, and community agencies and organizations, Dr. Roane's research is interdisciplinary, involving many different scientific disciplines and cultural expertise in addressing complex issues impacting environmental health and representation. Working within the fields of basic microbial ecology and applied environmental microbiology, her research has been sponsored by research agencies including the U.S. Department of Energy, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Forest Service, the National Park Service, and the National Science Foundation. Regularly publishing and presenting their research, Dr. Roane's program combines conventional and advanced molecular and biochemical approaches to the study of microorganisms and involves students from diverse backgrounds, educational levels, and scientific interests. Dr. Roane is currently a director of the Environmental Stewardship of Indigenous Land Certificate Program and is the faculty sponsor of the CU Denver American Indian Science and Engineering Society student organization. Next, we have Gilbert John. Dr. John has a PhD in microbiology from Colorado State University and a postdoc in toxicology from the University of Arizona. His decision to pursue an academic career was fueled by his desire to engage in high-level research and to teach future scientists, particularly underrepresented minorities. As a Native American scientist himself, Dr. John is keenly aware of the underrepresentation of Native Americans in the biomedical sciences. For 22 years as a faculty at Oklahoma State University and head of a research laboratory, he was fortunate enough to work with underrepresented populations. In his research, Dr. John studies the structures and function of flavin proteins in Clostridium perfringens, Enterococcus faecium, and Pseudomonas aeruginosa. So maybe he'll give you the proper pronunciation of some of these critters that he works with, which are basically potential human pathogens. They're bad guys anyway. His research was funded mainly by the NIH, NSF, and private agencies. Through his research activities, Dr. John was able to develop direct multiple training programs for both undergraduate and graduate students. Building on this experience, he now serves as the Assistant Dean for Research in the College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences at Colorado State University, a full-time administrative position. In his capacity as Assistant Dean for Research, Dr. John's goal is to improve the research environment at CVMPS. Specifically, he assists and facilitates the development of faculty research efforts, pre-award, post-award, compliance, etc., student research training programs, and initiatives to improve diversity. Dr. John is also the PI of a research team that is addressing the impact of uranium mines on the Navajo people, as well as the co-PI on several training grants for undergraduate, graduate, and DVM students. And last but certainly not least, we have Kathy DeerInWater, who is the Chief Program Officer, American Indian Science and Engineering Society. Dr. Kathy DeerInWater is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, who joined ACES in October 2014 and completed her doctoral degree in ecology at the University of California, Davis, in September 2015. As a longtime member of the ACES family, Dr. DeerInWater brings firsthand experience and passion to ACES's mission of increasing the representation of Native people in STEM studies and careers. Dr. DeerInWater oversees program development, implementation, evaluation, and reporting for all ACES special projects, serving our youngest students to senior level professionals. In addition, Dr. DeerInWater serves as the PI or program director on all research projects such as National Science Foundation funded Lighting the Pathway to Faculty Careers for Natives in STEM project. So as you can see, we have an amazing panel assembled here of people in all stages of their careers of working through STEM and working to try to help increase the diversity of students in STEM. So what I would like to do now is just kind of go through and tap you each at a time to talk about a few particular details about the programs you're working on. I'm going to ask that you try to keep your answer to about 3 minutes, just so we can hear from everybody and still finish in time for the next panel coming up. So Dr. Cajete, do you want to start by telling us what are the goals of the programs that you've been working in, and how would you evaluate their effectiveness? How did you determine if these programs that you were working on were doing what you hoped they were doing? Oh, I think you're on mute, sir. I don't know if our technology folks can help Dr. Cajete with his microphone.
I'm trying to unmute. Give me a sec here. Is it possible to have someone else introduce first, and I'll do some background?
I think he's got it now.
Okay, great, thanks.
Oh, I see his lips moving, but I'm not hearing.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no.
Okay, so let's move to someone else.
Right.
Apparently we can't hear you.
So while we're working on that, maybe Jani or Jani, do you want to pick up this topic here of telling us a bit about the goals of the programs that you've been working on, and how you established whether they were working to help the students you were working with?
Sure. Yate, she Jani Ingram, Yenishe, Nanesteji, Tachini, Nishle, Bilagana, Bashische, Kinlatine, Dashish, she Milagana, Dashish Nali. So good morning. Again, I'm Jani Ingram, and so I have been involved in a variety of things. So one of the things that I've been involved with since coming to NAU is the partnership for the prevention of cancer in Native Americans. And that program really almost goes cradle to grave. I mean, it starts students out very early. Early on, we really focused on undergraduates. But in the last, I'd say 8 years, 10 years, we've really worked on looking at opportunities for our students to really tap into some of the NIH programs in order to, sort of move through what they call the pipeline. But in the work that we've done with our Native students here at NAU, we found that really pipeline is not a great way to describe how students move through the process. And we actually wrote an article called, and thinking about it more as a web, because a lot of times we found that students will come in to a program and then maybe a family issue, maybe there's just a lot of things that might have them step out for a while. So maybe they finished their undergraduate degree, or maybe they finished even their associate's degree, come back a later time, maybe even changed their areas of interest. And so maybe they got, an environmental science degree, but they really want to do something more in the social sciences and that kind of stuff. So we found that it's really important to keep all those options open, and not just to sort of say, well, you need this linear path. So you need to, attend undergrad, go to graduate school, do a postdoc, and then there you go. So, and we've involved an evaluator in this process from the very start. I think that's been really important in understanding, really how it works maybe better for Native students than, other students type of thing. And so looking at not just, did they progress from point A to point B, but how was their relationship with maybe their faculty mentor? How was their relationship with other students? Building cohorts is really important. And so I think thinking sort of broader and maybe outside of the box is really a much better approach to this. And also looking at what the students' goals are. I think sometimes, you know, I hate to say it, but in NIH world, they want this, 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 and this. And sometimes students really have a passion to do something, you know, in their communities that really doesn't mean that they need to go do a postdoc or something like that. So, so I'd say that those are the things that I've learned over time working on this project since 2002. So.
I like that a lot, a web instead of a pipeline. I've always been, you know, especially since the coming of so many pipelines that are disrupting so many of our communities, pipelines has sort of taken on a negative connotation. So I much prefer that idea of a web. Thank you so much, Jani. Timberley, do you want to tell us a little bit about the programs you've been working on and how you've assessed how they've been helpful to students?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be here. My name is Timberley Roane. I'm a member of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. My families are the Oxidines, the Hammonds, and the Hunts. I am currently not on my own homelands. I'm joining today from Denver, Colorado. So I would like to acknowledge that I am on the homeland of the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, and the Ute nations. I'm one of the co-directors of the Environmental Stewardship of Indigenous Lands program, which is a certificate program that we offer at the University of Colorado, Denver. And one of the things that we're trying to accomplish with the ESOL, for short, certificate, is that we're trying to complement STEM training and offer students an opportunity to not only engage in their own identities and cultures within this larger STEM context, but to also get the additional skill sets and training that might be needed for our students to qualify for actual jobs as tribal liaisons. And tribal liaisons are employment positions for federal, state, tribal governments, nonprofit agencies, wherein students are going to serve in the role as in facilitating conversations between tribal and non-tribal groups. And our program in particular with ESOL focuses within the context of environmental sciences and all that that actually includes. So our goal is with ESOL is to connect students culturally and in terms of their identity within STEM. And we're a certificate program. So we're not awarding degrees, but we're available for undergraduate and graduate students to make these connections with their own individual STEM training, which can be across multiple different disciplines and different departments throughout campus. And in terms of evaluation, we're really focusing on using Indigenous evaluation framework. So just like Jani was saying, we have an external evaluator. They're using Indigenous framework to look at our programming, which means we're really relying heavily on direct input from our students to determine programming, to evaluate the success of our programming. And we're doing that beyond just the typical institutional criteria of retention and graduation rates. We're really engaging with our students in storytelling and narratives so that we can learn from our students what their needs are and how ESOL can then adjust to provide those needs. We're a young program, we're just entering year 3. So we're still in the process of trying to identify our own successes and failures. So thank you everyone for the opportunity to be here.
Well, that's great. Kind of weighing the needs of the students and the needs of the tribal communities they'll be working for and using some of that web model that Jani was talking about to bring them together. So I hear that Dr. Cajete's volume is fixed now. Let's give this another try. Hey, there you go. Great.
I hope you can hear me now. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, sounding good.
I'm not really sure what's going on, but you know, these days you have to go with the flow, as they say. Yeah, I guess I would say, you know, being a kind of an old dog in this race here, I'm, you know, I've been through so many different kinds of STEM related programs, beginning with that really in the early 70s, in terms of really trying to address, you know, first of all, engaging more Native students in science and math related areas, but also looking at ways to get them into colleges and universities and then through to their research. early member of ACES way back when it first started. Also doing a lot of work, around the country for tribal colleges, and also was a part of that Indigenous evaluation framework team. So I've done a lot of work, and certainly there's been a lot of progress, I think, just given my day and back in the day in the 70s when we were just starting all of this kind of work, and just hoping for little successes. I do have one thing to say, even though I have all this experience and have worked at the University of New Mexico for 26 years before I retired this summer, is that there's still resistance. There is still resistance within institutions with regard to Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous perspective. So, the first phase was just to help students matriculate the status quo as, the curriculums as they existed in universities. The next stage of this really was to really begin to bring in Indigenous scholarship and Indigenous histories and cultural histories and perspectives into the teaching of science. We're really at the next stage, which really demands us to begin to infuse Indigenous knowledge right directly into the science curriculums. And of course, there's huge resistance on the part of practically every university science program with regard to even the mention of that kind of initiative. But, as Indigenous peoples, we have to begin to, I think, push for that kind of recognition. I was in a conference yesterday in UNESCO Canada, in which, these thoughts and these perspectives are being brought forward into the international realm, with regard to opening science up to Indigenous thought. And of course, that was a good dialogue and discussion. But so we've already begun this process. But what I saw at the University of New Mexico, and I'm sure it's at Berkeley, I'm sure it's at Colorado State, I'm sure it's at almost every university science program, is that, well, there's a willingness to incorporate Native students and bring them into science status quo, help them in different kinds of ways. There's a huge resistance with regard to the Indigenous knowledge itself. And so it's kind of an interesting kind of play where we're at. We're at a beginning stages, I think, of having real success of recruiting some Native students into science and technology fields. But at the same time, there's resistance. And I think any of you who have been involved with working with science programs in colleges and universities know what I mean when I'm saying this. So I think the next part of this, particularly if we are going to recruit more Native students into science-related fields, this has to be a huge question that begins to address, this kind of issue of Indigenous knowledge. Now, I think Timberley, mentioned, she's involved with a new program. I think you're on the right track, Timberley, in terms of the kinds of things you're getting the institution to do, because it's incremental. You do this a little at a time in terms of getting institutions to change the way they think about Indigenous science, in the way they think about Indigenous students and the kinds of needs Indigenous students have. I have firm confidence in the fact that Indigenous people, Indigenous ways of knowing, as they get more traction within mainstream education systems, as they are in Canada right now, I have to mention, not in the United States, but more so in Canada. Difference in politics, right? That we will begin to see more Native students coming into science-related fields, because we need them. We need them desperately in health and in environment, in various areas of environmental social justice, et cetera, on the line. But yet there's still this glass ceiling that students face. I know tribal colleges are trying different kinds of methodologies to get their students into university science. But again, I still see that's what we would call systemic bias, which has existed for quite some time and which is now being written about extensively primarily out of the Maori and out of Canada and out of Australian Aboriginal people scholars. Some here in the United States. But I think, part of our issue here is that for a very long time, we've brought forward these ideas and these perspectives, but it's our own system, within the United States. It's our own still very colonized, very a system that still is not welcoming of Indigenous students or Indigenous thought. And this is what time and time again my students have told me, both in Native studies, because I had a lot of students coming from the sciences into Native studies because they didn't feel welcome in the science-related areas. And so they took a Native studies degree rather than finishing out their science degree. So there has been research. If you talk to graduate students, with regard to the kinds of issues, the kinds of challenges they continue to face, with regard to our standard science programs, yes, we can fit them to the program to a certain extent. But if that program is still not welcoming, is still not really interested in changing, then we still have these challenges. And this is why it repeats itself continually. We're still trying to get more Native students into the science-related fields, which was, our intent back in 1970, and we're still pretty much trying to do the same thing. Although there are better programs, I think more conscious programs that are evolving, but we still have that systemic institutional bias within the teaching and learning of science in university. And that's a huge issue. So I want to bring that forward into the discussion. Thank you for your time.
No, I think that's a super important point. So thank you for drawing our attention and walking us through that timeline, because it is helpful for those of us who are a little newer to the field to hear that background and that timeline of the struggle that you've been at the forefront of. I think everybody's got a copy of your Indigenous science book and has carried it with us all through our education. So thank you for that. Kathy, Dr. DeerInWater, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the programs that you've been working on for some of these young science scholars?
Sure, yeah. So I think one of real significance is the Lighting the Pathway to Faculty Careers for Natives in STEM program, which I know a number of people I've scrolled through the names are actually a part of this program. So it's good to see them represented here. This program is funded by the National Science Foundation. We're beginning our 7th year and 6th cohort of Native undergrad, grad students, and postdocs. So far, there are about 140 in the program. And in addition to kind of the programmatic components, the project is also conducting research and surveying the participants to look at how different program components are impacting their persistence in their field, with the ultimate goal being to create and foster more Native students who go into faculty positions at colleges and universities across the country in STEM. And we have a number of scholars who are involved in the FEWS related topics. So that's really exciting. This program, it's really a mentorship program at heart, but then really focusing on professional development. And as the name of the program suggests, lighting the pathways for students and postdocs into faculty careers, and really digging deep into what are some of the challenges, but then what are some of the ways that current Native faculty have been successful. So we really want to think of it not in a deficits framework, but thinking about the assets that we know our Native scholars have and how they can really build on those in order to be successful in faculty positions. So some of the ways that we evaluated this program and what we've learned from it is that mentorship obviously is important, but we're finding that mentorship that has a real like cultural sensitivity or understanding to it is important. So Native students want mentors that relate to them and understand their culture. And that also students are very interested in how they can incorporate um, their cultures and their interests in working with their tribal communities into their research and their careers. And then we're also finding that having a community of like-minded scholars and again other native, that cultural understanding component is also significantly related to their intentions to persist. So we're looking at things like STEM identity, STEM efficacy, and STEM values, and how our different program components are keeping those levels stable or increased, and how those correlate with their intentions to persist. So it's been a really exciting program. I think it's very unique. We're happy to be building this program out, and now we are also um, looking at how we can expand and scale some of the components to reach even more students, as this is kind of a cohort model program. So if there are, any undergrad or graduate students and postdocs interested in this program, be happy to connect and talk more about it. One thing I think that kind of separates it from what some of the other panelists have brought up is it's not specifically offering research opportunities, but it's supporting Native scholars who are doing STEM research and who are interested in research careers. And I think it's important to make sure we're also recognizing and supporting the social aspects of this endeavor. Because as we all know, at any given institution, there's always just a few or handful of Native students in STEM fields. And so the goal of ACE's program is really to connect those students and develop this much larger national network. And I'll stop there.
Great. So it seems like an important part of getting to that third phase that Dr. Cajete described is getting Indigenous faculty in there that are going to be more willing to incorporate these kind of knowledges. So it sounds like a really important program you've got going on there. Is Dr. John with us again? Dr. Gilbert, John, your face disappeared. I'm not sure. Maybe we'll check back in with him because it looks like maybe he is not here yet.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm working with him offline, but we're not having success yet.
All right. It's, all the technical difficulties. We're becoming quite used to it in this era of Zooming everything. So until then, Jani, we're going to go back to you for the next question, thinking about how do you incorporate students and community input to improve the programs that you've been working on?
Right. So I would say for a few different. So I have this cancer project that I oversee, which has multiple research projects. And the focus is really to look at Native American concerns, mainly in the state of Arizona, but with cancer. And so, for example, one of the projects is looking at H. pylori and stomach cancer out on Navajo. And so, honestly, pretty easy to recruit students to get involved in that type of project. There's sort of an environmental aspect to it, looking at some of the water sources. So there's students from all different sort of walks in terms of STEM. Some of the work that I do with just environmental analytical chemistry, again, it's of interest to me, and the students get very engaged when it's a project that they think can truly impact and improve things for their communities. So that seems to be a really good way to sort of bring to life some of the things that they're learning. I know here at NAU, we have, and partly because we're not a big Research One institution, so our doctoral programs tend to be interdisciplinary, which actually is a really nice thing for a lot of Native students, really want to think in terms of, you know, a holistic and as we've talked about, the traditional ecological knowledge, sort of a larger picture. So we have an environmental science program that's like that. There's a new health disparities program that's like that. So I think those are the types of things that really draw those students in, and really working with the communities to say, what are the issues that are important to you? And really even doing that community engaged or in community participatory research types of activities where it really is a partnership. So I think those are the things that I've seen really draw students in and help them to, you know, not just go to get their bachelor's, not just get their master's, but really see that they, you know, I want to go further in order to, you know, really make an impact for my community.
Yeah, knowing that the work that you're doing is benefiting someone outside of just handing in a paper or handing in lab results, I'm sure is much more gratifying for students and gives you a reason to want to go through this sometimes painful process of acquiring these degrees, right? Thank you so much. Oh, Dr. John, here you are. Wonderful. Why don't you tell us a little bit
I'm
about
sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm not sure what happened, but I lost you guys, but I'm back.
But you're back. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the programs that you've been working on and how you figure out their effectiveness?
Okay, Cushing. Yeah, thank you very much. Let me begin with my traditional introduction. Adone Schlinige, Tlashin Slim, but Tani Bashichin, Kitlichini Dashiche, Aro, Twachini Dashinale, Twilkana, Shagun. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. So just quickly, as I put on the chat, I put a link to a site that we have at Colorado State called the One Health Institute. So really, the One Health Institute, more the One Health concept, is really the basis behind much of my initiative here at Colorado State University. So if you're not familiar with One Health, basically One Health, the concept is the understanding that everything's connected, particularly humans, human health, animal health, environmental health. So all those three major pieces in terms of how they're connected to one another really dictates how those particular aspects move forward in terms of their health. Being a veterinary school, but also biomedical college, we have human and animal research and some environmental research as well. So it's really a good combination for us to kind of use this as our umbrella initiative. So to do that, one of our goals and one of my goals really to improve participation of Native Americans in STEM, particularly in my area, would be to engage or to develop what we call community engagement projects. And really what that means is it's based upon years of my own personal experience with either my students or just my thoughts in terms of what I've learned over the years. And that is really when we talk with Native students and ask them what they want to do with their career, a lot of times the answers I get is I want to help my community. And so, I mean, that's a difficult thing to do, particularly when we look at institutions and systems. They don't necessarily allow students, particularly Native students, to come and earn a degree, do research projects that fall within their desire. And so that's the challenge. And that's one thing I've been working on is with this One Health concept, is to really begin look at community engagement projects. So we started one with the Navajo Nation with some current projects that are already going on. Jani Ingram has one very closely related to this, and a lot of our work is an extension of what she's done so far, and she's done some fantastic work, really allowed us to kind of get our foot in the door as well. And that's really to look at specific abandoned uranium mines. And we selected an area where Jani has done some data collection, but this particular chapter, Sweetwater chapter, which is very small chapter, but if you're familiar with that on the reservation, it's close to the Four Corners by larger chapters such as Tishnaspas, Red Mesa. So it's in that area, but it's a heavily contaminated abandoned mine area. And I don't know why it's less studied, partly because I believe it's remote, very difficult to get to, small community. So we've engaged with that community, and we developed some really good relationships with chapter, with the people, through community meetings, luncheons, presentations, field trips. Field trips are probably one of the best experiences we've had. We've taken our students, and also a lot of our focus has been training a postdoctorate of ours. She's Navajo. Her name is Dr. Felita Charlie from Shiprock. So we have opportunities for her to develop her research portfolio, and the intention there is for her to become faculty at Colorado State University. So we'd like to open up opportunities where future faculty and, of course, graduate students and undergrads have opportunities to work in these types of communities to develop research projects with faculty, and then either earn a degree or just gain experience that would help them in their work environment. And so that's what we've been able to do so far. And, you know, just a couple highlights in terms of what's unique and novel is that we're hoping to do some microbiology, water, you know, type work. Basically, we're going to test the installation of an arsenic removal filter system at a livestock well. And this is based upon the community's desire to have that well clean. And luckily, there are some really nice filter systems that remove arsenic. And we just are astounded that Navajo Nation and others haven't invested in these. They're not that expensive. 10 years ago they were, but today they're very inexpensive. So those are things that we're working on or have been working on, but unfortunately COVID really put a stop to this. And that's just one example of one of the projects where it's community-based driven. We're asking the community, what do you want? And they say, we want clean water. You know, when you engage it from a livestock human perspective, and also looking at how the livestock in terms of how they interact with the environment, we've encompassed all of those aspects into the research project. So it becomes what we call our One Health project, where we're not just looking at levels of contamination of uranium and arsenic and other heavy metals, but we're also looking at plants, and we're all looking at how that affects animals and their health, and then ultimately how that affects human health, not only in terms of food consumption, but also psychological. So we brought in some social scientists, and they're also faculty. They're also supporting students that allow not just people that are interested in biological science, but also social science. And there's a lot of interest in students that are entering these fields, and they're interested in helping their community. And one aspect that we don't see is a One Health social science push, where people come in and say, well, I'm really interested because I know my community farms and they have agriculture, and the land is not healthy. And that's really heavily weighing on our health. And we believe that. And so we brought in some social scientists to really begin to interact and interview the community, get to know what's on their minds. And then from that, our social scientists, and I'm not a social scientist, but you develop ways in which you can then pull out and extract what we predict is causing severe health issues with Navajo people. So anyway, it's really interesting. So we're opening that opportunity from a social science, from a biological science, and a physical science piece that allows students to come in, but really maintain that community engagement. So that's our goal, and we've been successful so far, and we're expanding this. And one of the things that we want to do, and we're expanding this through our One Health network, is to develop this network where traditional knowledge really becomes the focus behind what we think is needed and what students want when they enter and take a course or enter a degree program, or just think about what they want to do with their future, is that they just don't see how traditional knowledge from their own tribe is not incorporated into Western science. We want that to happen. So I think that's going to be one of the keys behind allowing more students to be more excited about entering STEM and thinking about how they can bring with them or even learn from what we've been able to develop through this traditional knowledge network system that we hope to build that allows this opportunity for students to be successful in science. So that's really what we're building, and we're hoping to get there. And one of the interesting things and exciting things is that when you look at different researchers and institutions throughout this country, as well as our neighbors in Canada, there are lots of pockets of examples where traditional knowledge is being incorporated into Western science. We just haven't yet built a strong network. And so we're contacting people, we're working with people, and really we hope to build a strong network. And I think that's what it's going to take. It's a collective impact approach where it's going to take many, many people and institutions and systems to not only change, but to get on board with allowing us to incorporate what we call traditional knowledge as being a key piece in science. So that's really what's happening at Colorado State and with all our partners that have joined us as well.
Great, thank you so much. And you did a great job of answering the first two questions together. So we got you all caught up there. You did, that was perfect.
Okay.
Dr. Roane, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about how you incorporate work between students and community. So I know you told us a little bit about the Environmental Stewardship of Indigenous Lands project, and I imagine that takes a lot of negotiating between the needs of the community and what kind of stewardship roles that they are wanting these students to play. So could you tell us a little bit about that process?
Yes, thank you. So ESOL works very, very closely with students and community. As a matter of fact, we try not to separate students and community. Our students are Native in and of themselves, so they bring obviously their own community perspectives as well as other types of community members that we work with. One of the things that we do strive to do with ESOL that at least differentiates us from other types of academic programs at the university is once we connect with the students, even pre-application to the institution, whether they're graduate or undergraduate, is we work with them through the application process. They have a point person that helps them with financial aid, that helps them with registration, gets them settled in at the university. Housing and other types of resources will be included in with that. And once they're at the university, we have a network of mentors that are developed. And this is where we bring in our non-student community members, where we have professionals, Native professionals that are working in their respective career paths that connect with our students to offer professional mentoring, career mentoring, but perhaps most importantly, talk about the challenges that these professionals are experiencing in their career paths, in their respective jobs, with linking their culture and personal identity within the context of STEM. And in this case, it's within the field of environmental sciences and thinking about FEWS. That's a big challenge and a big concern for many of our students. And because we've listened to our students, that's the big thing that really drives a lot of ESOL programming in terms of coursework, internships, workshops, is listening to our students and identifying what scares them, what's concerning to them. And then trying to really actively bring in professionals and community members to mentor our students, support our students as they're trying to figure out and navigate this very standard westernized STEM training, graduate and undergraduate, and figuring out ways to bring in their cultural identity. Because not all STEM programming is going to be able to provide our students active research projects that directly link these two things together. So we're trying to think a little innovatively, how can students still maintain their identity and bring it to their respective STEM discipline, project, research, training. So that's something that we really strive to do. And the other thing that we try to do with ESOL is to really advocate and represent our students as individuals. So we find out from our students what they individually need. And if they need some support as they're confronting, maybe confronting is too strong of a word, but they're approaching a faculty member where maybe they're not seeing eye to eye, ESOL has stepped in and said, okay, well, let's make sure that the faculty member is aware. So we're also trying to kind of expand community and the definition of community to bring in our own STEM faculty staff at the university so that they themselves have some of this cultural training to help support our students and ultimately also community members.
Oh, that's great. And I think, Kathy, that ties in a little bit to the work that you were describing earlier. So the question is about, incorporating students and community input to provide the program. But what you were describing, Dr. DeerInWater, is sort of creating community as well at the university. So I don't know if you want to touch a little bit more on the different kinds of communities that you're working within and among, and how you're incorporating all of those needs into further developing that program.
Yeah, sure. So with the Lighting the Pathway program, we really are focused on building a community among the scholars who are in the program, and also with faculty who serve as mentors to the program. And I think that community building piece is essential to the project, and we're finding that through the evaluation and research side of the program. But I think more to kind of the relevance of the points made so far, with ACES's other programs, particularly with some of our K through 12 programs, we're definitely have changed our focus as an organization to work more with specific communities. And we're developing a lot of community-based programs where we are kind of taking some of the things that I feel like ACES does really well. We've been working on curriculum development. We obviously do a lot of college and career readiness, and adapting those resources and models that we've created over many years to then work in individual tribal communities. And so we've been trying to do a lot of relationship building in communities to work with cultural knowledge keepers, to work with elders, and also work with tribal leaders, either governments or other positions, in order to inform the work that we're doing, so to make it more community-based, which I think has been a great change for ACES. And I think we're really starting to see some of that pay off in terms of how many new students we are able to engage in STEM and help them to see the relevance for these fields within their own communities. And I think that's a really important link to be made, even for our youngest students, but of course for college age students as well, is helping them to really identify some of their interests with community needs, and how those are often very much STEM related.
And Dr. Cajete, in thinking about kind of the long arc of your career and the various programs that you were involved with, what are some examples that you saw where community input was really taken seriously and helped to improve some of the programs that you worked with or interacted with? Did we miss my whole question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, I think, the movement towards, the community-based focus is really the way to go, particularly for our Native communities who have asked for that, many, many years. My experience is that the more that you do that with community, it does generate more interest on the part of students to want to, engage the STEM fields in ways that, are relevant and important to them and their communities. I know that tribal colleges over the years have also really, really pushed this idea as well, and they're seeing some success with that. I guess, just a general question for everyone is, as you engage your institutions with all of these various kinds of initiatives and programs, I know for a fact that there are nodding heads, but in the back rooms there are heads that are going like this, and I'm wondering how much really gets through to, let's say, the deans of university science programs or engineering programs. Maybe they are sensitive, but when it really gets down to the faculty level, what I've seen is that most science faculty in universities, tend to do what they've always done. And, if the student adapts, fine. If the student doesn't adapt, well, that's the way it goes. And so I think that's, again, a big challenge that, despite our successes and despite the many programs that we do have in colleges and universities, to engage and to recruit our students into STEM fields, that when they actually get into the field, they get into especially the classroom, it's not a welcoming experience. So I've always thought that what was really, really important was for us to educate the professors themselves directly and systematically, with regard to not only what their programs are doing, because I know at UNM, a lot of our science and engineering professors weren't even aware of how many different kinds of programs we had for Native students in the university itself. And I'm willing to bet that that's true for most institutions as well, that they don't really know because they've always basically done, just what they needed to do, in their own small sphere. And so I think that's going to be the trick that turns it. And I think the more that the individual programs within institutions really advocate for their program and really begin to make direct connections to the science professors, engineering professors, by involving them, directly, and also really informing them and educating them on what's important and why you're doing the programs in the first place for the students. That's going to make a lot of inroads into an opening of their thinking, with regard to how they can actually change their curriculum, because that's the other thing. Professors are not changing their curriculums for their students. They're younger ones, yes. I would say the younger generation of professors are doing it. The older generations, my age, they're not. And so again, it's within the institutions themselves that we have to begin to really focus on doing some of this work. So that's what I have to say, at this point, to that question. Hopefully that's helpful.
No, that's a good one. We have just under 10 minutes before we're going to dive into the questions from the audience. So I want to pose this kind of last question for each of you to think about. Several of you have mentioned, those deans that are up there making those decisions, or those older faculty. If you had the ear of these folks, what would you tell them? What should the institutions or these different programs be doing to attract more Native students for research and research centers? So if you could sit down with the heads of these different universities and say, look, this is what you need to be doing as institutions to make these more welcoming places for students to be successful, what would you tell them? And we're going to start with Dr. DeerInWater, since I know you have to check out right at 12:15 for another engagement. Yes, we're busy people. We're all over the world at once here. So give us a.
Well, there's so many things. I would say first would be hire more Native faculty. I think the idea that they're not out there is not true, and they could easily hire more Native faculty if they set that as a goal. I think I don't know, it's hard. I mean, change their entire culture, like the cultures of all institutions. But I think hiring more Native faculty, providing more support and programming in order to make not just the undergraduate experience, but
Yes.
graduate experience more comfortable. and inviting and supportive for Native students. I think when we see colleges that like struggle to even
Okay,
to even struggle to find a space that's theirs on campus, I think that's critical, like at least carving out a center as a way to build community at these institutions. And then I think a couple of things that we're working on that I hope to also, continue to engage folks is for us to think about how we can transfer more Native students from 2-year degrees to 4-year degrees. And we know that that's an important area. We see that lots of underrepresented groups are actually overrepresented at 2-year institutions. And so converting those students into 4-year degrees is critical. And then another area that I think could have significant impact is if we are able to make the link of giving back and community at an institutional level. And so really supporting students as well as faculty in the service that they do. And so we call that term service, but we also could call it giving back to community, and including that in, say, tenure promotion, including that in how even graduate students are evaluated, because we all know as graduate students, Native graduate students get asked to do a lot. You get asked to serve on panels and, participate in different institutional happenings. And I think making sure that everyone is acknowledged for all of the work that they do is important. So those are
Great,
things that come to mind.
Thank you very much. No, those are all very doable starts. And so I appreciate that you brought forward to us things that are not insurmountable, things that would not be that hard to implement. So thank you. Dr. Ingram, is there anything you'd like to add to that about what can institutions and programs do to be more attractive to Native students in research careers and research centers?
Yeah, so I just would like to talk about a project that I have that's being funded by NSF to look at actual cultural and spiritual barriers that prevent perhaps Native students from continuing in STEM fields. And this is mostly my personal observations from working with a lot of Native students. Biology certainly has issues, but this project actually is looking at anyone in STEM fields, so engineers and health science folks, math people, and just trying to understand what are some of those reasons why a student might start out as a freshman or sophomore thinking they want to be a biologist, and then they're like, I'm not dissecting that. Grandma would not be happy with me. So we actually are in the second year, and what our hope is that if we can really understand that and then sort of go forward and say, these are some institutional changes just to the curriculum. Just, is there, now they have frogs that aren't real frogs that you can look at, their anatomy, those types of things. So it's social science that I'm not really trained to do. So I have an awesome collaborator and we're learning a lot. So looking at both student barriers, but we've talked to Native American professionals to find out what were the things that they had to navigate in order to be successful. So hopefully we'll have some papers out that, we can learn a little bit and maybe try to help with some institutional change.
No, that sounds great. And you're already there collecting the data. So that's amazing. Dr. John, is there anything you would like to add about what can these programs or research centers, institutions be doing to attract more Native students and retain and help those students to be successful?
Oh, absolutely. I think at least one of the things that I've talked to our deans about is to really try to leverage, your institution's strengths, and every one of our institutions have those strengths. So when we think about our strengths, it's a veterinary college, it's a biomedical college, and that biomedical college extends into, very recently, we have a small cohort of medical students from the University of Colorado Medical School So we've got that human connection and a pretty good, strong environmental piece that I talked about is really our strength. And so again, the concept resonates really well with Native communities where everything's connected. You can't just focus on one thing and say, well, that's why you're sick. It's like, or there's indicators within the, what's out there, indicators in animals, indicators in plants, in water that really dictate your health. So anyway, we're leveraging that in the sense that the deans and the higher administration is beginning to understand that that's what it's going to take beyond the current efforts to recruit and retain and graduate our Native students and other professionals, whether they're, and maybe even to come back and be faculty at institutions where they can incorporate some of that information. And if they can gather that through a traditional knowledge activity or course or degree, then they're better positioned to be able to use that and feel like that's a place for them as a career and a future career for them. So that's what I think would be the message for everybody, is to look at their institution, see what their strengths are, leverage that. And then I think that the higher administration seems to be more willing to invest in that type of thing rather than developing completely something new, where you're spending most of your time trying to convince people, faculty, for example, that this is what you need to do, and they're not really on board because they've never done that before. So anyway, that's kind of the way we've approached it.
Great, thank you, Dr. John. I'd like to encourage everybody as well to be submitting any questions you have for any of the panelists into the chat box. I know we have one waiting for Dr. Cajete. He is speaking to Dublin right now. So when he comes back, we'll have him address that question. But if you have any other questions for the panelists, go ahead and type them in. Dr. Roane, do you want to give us your perspective about, what should different institutions be doing to attract more Native students and helping them to excel in these different research centers?
Yes, thank you. I want to acknowledge everything that has been said so far in relation to this, and I fully agree, the really strong words. So what I will just add to it is that I feel that administrators, faculty, and students just need to be given permission to engage in other ways of knowing. That this is an acceptable way of viewing the world, and it's an acceptable way of doing science. And really, when we think about STEM in general, the premise behind STEM in and of itself is flawed because it's relying in general on one school of thought. And yet, as each of us engage individually in our own scientific endeavors, we're not focusing on one school of thought. We're integrating different aspects of science, social science, physical sciences. We're engaging with others who represent different disciplines, and in those respective different disciplines have different cultures. So it's not that much of a stretch to open up STEM, thinking about personal identities and cultural values and these connections that we can otherwise make. And in a lot of ways, I just feel that permission needs to be granted in that direction. And I'll close with this. One of the things that I'm challenging, or ESOL, I should say, is challenging our own institution with, is that we're engaging a lot in an area that we're calling urban science. And urban science is different than other types of science done in other types of ecological systems. So let's engage in Indigenous science. Right? It's another avenue, it's another integrative school of thought that we can bring to the table and bring to STEM. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much for that perspective. Let's see, I don't see any questions waiting. Alice has a question.
This has been an excellent panel. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and sharing your successes. I'm really interested in how the whole can be greater than the sum of the parts. Several of you have mentioned the value of a network. Timberley just talked about giving permission. How do you think we might be able to reach some of these goals by working with the research universities in our network. So you've been working within your own university, you've been working with clusters of universities, but now we have an opportunity to have a larger network. And we can link to the AGEP programs, we can link to the other underrepresented programs. If you could wave your magic wand, how would this greater network help your goals?
I think there's power in connecting. There's power in bringing all of these voices together. So then maybe, you know, each of us individually can go to our own institutions and so forth and say, look, this is what we're doing as a group. And isn't this amazing?
I think it gives some legitimacy as well,
Mm-hmm.
a broader acceptability, you said, within the program.
This is Jani. I think on the research side, what I saw when I've had funding from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, and one of the program directors, Sima Finn, was such an advocate for TEK and really looking hard at Indigenous science in environmental health types of things. And it really seemed like it was making a great impact, but she retired. So I think that's another thing, is at the high federal level of folks that do fund these things, that they see this as, you know, actually being able to address problems, as opposed to sort of our typical scientific, here's my box, I'm going to stay in my box type of thing. So I'm hoping that, you know, there'll be other program officers at that higher level that will take on that mantle.
Yes, Sima was wonderful. I miss her. She helped put together a great workshop that many of us were at NIH a few years ago. Mark has a question for everyone. As Native scholars, how would you see getting more Native faculty recruited? And another question for Dr. Cajete, who's off to the side still in Dublin, but if other people want to reflect on how would changing engineering STEM curricula by incorporating TEK? So if anybody in our panel here wants to reflect on how to get more Native faculty recruited, and some ways that you have seen where TEK has been effectively introduced to science curricula. Is there anybody who wants to pick that up?
Could TEK be defined?
Traditional environmental knowledge.
Okay.
Or
Or traditional ecological knowledge, depending on who you're talking to, but.
So I'll just comment on the recruitment. So it is my goal to get half my department to be Native. So we hired a Native American biochemist not too long ago, and then we had another lecturer that came in, but it takes a lot of targeting, like really, you know, looking out there and seeing who's there and talking to them about your institution, and then convincing your higher ups, your president, your provost, that, you know, let's really just go after specific people and not just say, well, if we have an open call for a tenure track position, that, you know, somehow this Native person's going to apply and do this. So I feel like that's really important, is to, you know, and see how that person can really fit into, I think Gilbert talked to this, you know, what are your strengths, and go after people that are, you know, this is a really good fit for that person.
Yeah, if I can add, I know one of the things we did at Colorado State University was through the provost's office, they created a Native American postdoctorate training program. And the intent was to recruit Native postdoctorates with the intention of transitioning them into faculty positions. So we had 5, and the one I mentioned was one of them. Dr. Felita Charlie was able to get in one of those positions. So yeah, so that's one way to do it. So if all works out, these 5 Native faculty, and they're from all different disciplines, they're not just from our college, it was open to the whole university. So we had really good candidates, and they're going through the training process right now. So if all goes well, we'll have 5 new Native faculty at Colorado State University in a few years.
And if you'll permit me, I know I would like to address maybe the engineering part, at least with what we've done with engineering. So in our ESOL program, we do have a non-native engineering faculty member, and that faculty member is actively in reviewing his course material, trying to identify like where the names of certain models have come from and the history of the individuals who have developed those models that now just have become a standard accepted protocol in engineering, and is really looking at and then openly discussing in his classes, okay, well, this might be this model and this individual developed it, but we need to understand, here's the context that this model was developed under. So that this engineering faculty member is trying to bring in those cultural components by at least opening up the discussion so that the students know the history behind the material that they in and of themselves are learning.
I would say the other, like at our place, there's an engineering faculty who does turbine development and wind energy, and really has been working with some of the communities on the western side of Navajo and bringing in those students and really thinking about it. You know, and he's a white guy. He's not a native person, but he has really, you know, gotten the trust, I think, of the community to try and, you know, sort of move that forward. And so it's so you thinking about TEK, but also thinking about, you know, the economic development, you know, aspects too, and helping those communities to you know, have another resource.
Absolutely. And we had someone chime in from Oman mentioning how there's so much more of a focus now all of a sudden on STEM and away from humanities. So it sounds like part of what you are describing is a really interdisciplinary approach to science. So incorporating some of these more humanities-based themes of thinking about what is the history of some of these principles, who are the human beings who drew from their own cultures to develop some of these theories and models. So I think that's important, and I'm glad that you brought that up in this context. So unfortunately, now we have 5 minutes left and everyone is coming in with all of these super interesting questions. So I'm going to just throw a few out there and see if people want to pick them up in the last 5 minutes. Have you seen diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging evolve since you started your academic journey? And what do you think has helped that at your institutions? If anybody wants
I just want to make a comment about that, not at the institution level, but I'm a part of the American Chemical Society Committee on Professional Training. And as such, there's a certification for certain chemistry degrees. But anyway, there is a huge push to have diversity, equity, inclusion. We're calling it respect, as actually a measurable thing in departments across the country. So it's pretty exciting. And definitely the happenings of this summer really sort of it's been in the background and it really brought it to the forefront. So I think it's exciting because it can impact a number of at least chemistry departments across the country.
Absolutely. And Karletta responded that she likes the term, the DIEB. I hadn't heard the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And that belonging is really something that's come out in a lot of your presentations, the web that Jani mentioned, and the communities that Kathy was mentioning earlier. So we have 4 minutes left. Is there anything else that any of our presenters really wanted to bring up that they felt that they didn't get the chance to touch on thus far?
I guess one other thing I'd add that I think is a strength of my institution is that we have a Native American advisory committee that is actually advising at the institutional level, along with, he's the vice president for Native American initiatives, who reports directly to the president, and just having that's really brought about things like a master's in public health, which is what a lot of the communities said they really wanted. That MPH program actually has an Indigenous track. So those types of things trying to hear, but really, again, it's got to, you know, we're in the trenches. I feel like, you know, at that higher level, there has to be the, you know, someone talking into the ear of those that can make a difference.
Absolutely. Wonderful. All right, we are at time. Alice, I don't know if you want to wrap us up in any particular way, but thank you all for coming. Thank you to our presenters for sharing all of your valuable and important experience with us. And thank you to all of you who came and sat and listened and engaged and asked questions.